It's me again. Today we're going to be going over some of the basic things that you can do in Illustrator. And I've got in front of us a small set of skills tasks that we'll be covering in this tutorial. So let's dive right in, and we're going to try to reproduce this graphic here, and at the end of the day this is what you'll be needing to produce. And let's get started. So we're going to jump straight in, and we're going to talk about the shape builder straight off, and we need to reproduce these shapes and all these other bits and pieces, so we're going to get stuck in. So I'm going to be creating this shape over here on a new layer. So I'm starting off with a brand new layer, and I'm going to be drawing out a series of shapes to replicate this funny looking dude here, and I'm going to set up my colours like so forth. Okay, and I'm going to draw a series of circles here that sort of basically represent this shape here. So I'm just drawing a number of circles. One thing about the shape builder, and I'm just drawing circles here, and I'm clicking on a certain piece. I'm holding Option with my direct selection tool, or my selection tool I should say, and I'm creating these shapes. I need to unite these shapes using the shape builder, and as you can see with the shape builder, things need to be overlapping or touching, and as you can see, that's in fact what's happening, they're overlapping. I'm going to get my shape builder, I'm going to click on my shape builder, and I can click and hold and drag through these shapes to combine them into one shape. So I'm just clicking and holding and dragging through those shapes like that. So I have this little dude on top. Okay, so that's using the shape builder. I've got this little mouthpiece that we're going to cut out, his little mouth there, so I'm just going to use a rounded rectangle, and I'm just going to draw another shape over the top. Now I'm going to delete that from the first shape. So to do that, of course, I need to be overlapping. Shapes need to be overlapping. And I'm going to select everything. Again, I'm clicking and selecting everything. And I have the shape builder again. But this time, instead of clicking and dragging through my shapes, I'm going to be holding down the Option key. And if I click and drag through there, I'm going to get my shape removed. Okay, so that's the shape builder. Next up, we have the clipping mask, and I'm going to be needing to bring in an image into my scene here, so I'm going to bring in something from the screen here. I've got a picture of a dog there, looks a bit like my dog, that one, and I want to have that housed within that circle there. So I'm just going to be using my transformation tools to scale that up a little bit, like so, something like that. So it's just sitting there like so. It's on my screen. Now, to use the clipping mask facility, you're going to need to have another shape. Now you can use any shape you like, or you can even use a pen tool path, but I'm just simply going to use an ellipse tool, and I'm going to click and drag over my image, and then I'm going to have them both selected. Now the shape that I've drawn on top is going to create a frame into which my image will sit. It's a clipping mask, so be aware that you need to have both the content or the image and the container, which is the shape, both selected. And I've got them both selected now by clicking and holding, and I'm right clicking with my mouse, and I'm going to create a clipping mask, and that's how you do it. There's a clipping mask, and if you double click into the image, you can move around the image within inside of that clipping mask. As you can see, that's going nicely, and I'm just going to double click back out. So there's my clipping mask. Next up, we have a type in a shape. Now shapes, of course, come in all different shapes, and I'm just going to do a circle like so, and I'm going to fill it full of nothing much in particular. So to do this, I'm going to need my type tool, type in an area tool. I'll be selecting from my type menu. And as you can see, when I do that, it's going to allow me to click into, I've got to click on the path, and now my text will sit inside of that shape. Now I'm going to make my text a bit smaller. I'm going to reduce the point size a little bit, like so. I'm going to make it just look a little bit more obvious. And I'm going to copy that text and just paste that in a whole bunch of times. So there's my, that's a bit ordinary, isn't it? But I've got a few spaces in there, but that's not the point. I've got text in a path there, so if I type in an amount of text and put in new text, I can fill up my text like so. So there's my text in a path. There we go. It's filling in. I'm just pasting more text in there. Doesn't look like text, it's just type, but there's text in a path. It's sitting there like that. Very good indeed. Text or type in a path. Coming along, we have the dashed stroke, and strokes in Illustrator are a very versatile thing, and you can do a lot of things with strokes. So I'm just going to draw a path with my pen tool, and I'm going to be clicking at the very start here, and at the very end I'm going to create another path. Now I'm just going to set my attributes up. As you can see there, I have a black stroke, nothing particularly interesting about that. But I'm going to come up to the top of my screen and increase my stroke width so it sort of replicates that thing underneath there somewhat. Okay, there is my stroke. Now it's a default stroke. Black is default. Up the top of my options bar up here, I have fill and stroke, and I can change my stroke weight. But clicking into this area here of the stroke accesses a whole bunch more things I can do with the stroke. We're looking to create a dashed line, so I'm going to click that dashed box, and as you can see I'm starting to get something that looks a little bit more like the thing I had on screen, and by just increasing the weight of that stroke I can get that idea like that. Okay, so that's how that particular stroke works. I'm just going to copy that down. I'm just going to select the shape, the path, and select Shift Option, drag it down. And now I'm going to go back to my stroke to alter this a little bit, and I'm going to reduce my initial dash at the top. As you can see I'm doing on screen, it's a little bit hard to see I believe. There you go, so there's my stroke, and I'm going to reduce that to maybe 2, see what that looks like. Yep, that looks pretty good. And by increasing the weight of that I get something that looks a little bit more like railway track, so that's another function of the stroke. Okay, so I'm going to reduce, or I should say copy that stroke again down because I'm very lazy. I like to just copy things if I can help it. And now I want that dotted line. Now, a dotted line, as you'll appreciate, will be accessed through the stroke menu. And I'm going to increase my initial dash to, I don't know, perhaps 5, maybe even bigger. Maybe I'll make it 8, but of course these numbers are all largely irrelevant, they'll change with everything. I'm going to reduce my weight, something that looks a bit squarer, and by simply using the different cap methods, and I'm going to use the central one, which is a round cap, I can get something, and I'm going to be changing my weight back now, 3 to 4. Maybe I need a larger gap there. And I'm just changing with my gap and my dash up here, and this is going to, with a little bit of fiddling, I'm sure you'll get something that looks a little bit more like a dot, changing these around, and eventually with a bit of manipulation of the dash line you'll get that look here. So that's some of the many functions of the dashed stroke. On to the pattern tool. Now the patterns, or I should say patterns in Illustrator, are a wonderful tool in themselves. Now you can create a shape, anything that you draw in Illustrator can be turned into a pattern. Now I'm just going to draw this hexagon or whatever you want to call that. Whoops, that's my shape if you like, and I'm just going to change the attributes to whatever I like them to be. I'm just going to go with black for this exercise. You don't have to do this exact shape. Anything that you draw in Illustrator can be converted into a pattern. And it's really quite a simple operation. Once you have your shape, you're happy with your shape, you can drop into the object menu and we can drop down into to pattern, and then we can make. Now we're going to just say OK to this, and we see that we enter this little interface here that's a live generation or a live replication of the pattern. So this is in fact live. That means I can change that colour. I should say I can select an object, I can change the colour, I can even add additional elements to a shape. So my shape starts to look a little bit more interesting. As I say, I can delete or add to this element here at any point in time to create a pattern. Now you can play with this a lot, and you can have it display in grid formation, brick by row, and there's a lot of fun to be had with that. So I'm creating this pattern now, and once I'm sort of happy with that pattern, there's a little function up the top, a little button here that's very easy to miss, and you hit the done key and you've created your pattern. Now it hasn't applied to that shape per se, it has been recorded in my swatches palette. So if you can't find anything in Illustrator, come down to the window, look for swatches, and that's going to be where your local colours are generated. And in fact, my pattern has been recorded in the swatch menu. So now it's a matter of selecting my swatch and then simply drawing a shape, and I'm going to be using a rectangle. I'm drawing my shape out. With a bit of luck, it's going to fill with that pattern. So that's patterns very, very quickly. One other cool thing about patterns, and again, I'm just going to copy this down here. Now, it might often be the case where a pattern is not exactly what you want it to be. Maybe you want it bigger or smaller or rotated or something. We can do that here in Illustrator. So I'm feeling like my pattern wants to scale down a little bit. So I'm going to select my scale tool, and as you can see, my shape is selected, and I have my scale tool. And I'm going to say that if you hold down your tilde key, and on my Mac it's directly beneath the escape key, and it looks like a little squiggle lying down. It's the tilde key, and it's directly beneath the escape key on my Mac. And if I click and hold in there, and I can scale down the contents of the container, not the container itself, but the contents of the container. So I'm holding my tilde key with my scale tool selected, and I can increase or decrease the scaling of that pattern. So that's a very handy thing to do. That took me years to find out. On to the text on a path. Now, we've covered some bits about text, but I'm going to draw a circle, and when you draw circles, you can click and drag to create a circle like so. Whoops, it's still fit with that. Or you can hold Option, and that will draw your circle from the middle, or your shape from the middle. Holding Option will draw it from the middle, and of course, holding Shift will just constrain that. So I've got my shape, yes, and I've got my type tool selected, I've got my type on a path tool selected, and then you'll see that clicking on the path, the active path, I can create text on that path. So that's very nice to do. There's not a graphic designer alive who doesn't want to know how to put text on a path, but that's it done quite simply, and that can be increased or decreased as you require. The point size, I should say. We have the next up here. We've got a shape here, and it is a square, believe it or not, and I'm just going to draw it off to the side here, like so. There's my shape, and if you look very closely at that shape when it's selected, you see these circular shapes inside, or the internal widget tools as we know them. They're little blue dots within the shape itself, and clicking on those I can increase or decrease the radius of that object. So we call those the radius tools. So that's how we get this sort of shape here. We get more complex shapes. If perchance only one of the corners needs to be altered, I'm going to need my white arrow or my direct selection tool, and I'm going to click and drag to isolate just one single corner. Just one single corner with my white arrow or my direct selection tool. I can click and drag that so that I get this sort of irregular shape, if you like. So I can pull that all the way down like that. That is how to alter one point of your corner radius tool. So that's that. I hope that helps. We've got a pattern brush. Now, brushes are a wonderful thing, and I'll do a tutorial on that in time, but the pattern brush is a wonderful thing for creating interesting things like we see here in the screen here. And pattern brushes, or brushes in fact, can be created with anything that you can draw within Illustrator. I'm going to do it with a simple square that I'm going to rotate around a little bit with a bit of luck. There I go. I'll scale that down a little bit. And I'm going to turn that into this pattern brush to achieve this effect. Now, to do this, you'll need your brush menu, which if you ever lose anything, it can be found, any palette can be found in the drop-down menu, brushes. And that will bring this little slide-out menu to the fore. As you can see, I've got several brushes, some I've already created. Simply a matter of selecting this shape and dragging that to the brush menu, and it will accept this shape. And I have a few choices here, but for this tutorial, we're going to create a pattern brush, and it will replicate that shape along a path. Replicate that shape along a path. So I'm going to say, okay, I've got a few little things to check here. Now you can play with the scaling, as you'll see, or you can actually change with some of these other settings. So you can have pressure sensitivity, you can achieve a little bit more spacing. So if you wanted to have a little bit more spacing between the patterns, you can have that. I'm just going to go with 0, so it should be a bit tighter. And you have some choices here, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm going to say OK. So that means now that I can now draw a shape and apply a pattern to that shape. So I'm going to draw a circle from the middle by holding Option and Shift, a circle from the middle holding Option and Shift and dragging, and there is my path. I'm going over to my brush menu, selecting the brush that I want to apply, and I've got that. Now, that's not exactly what you see on screen, but you can reduce or increase the point size to give you a different look, and sometimes accidents are a beautiful thing. Anyway, that's a pattern brush. I hope that helps. Next we come to the pen tool, which is a study all unto itself. Suffice to say that perhaps this is the tool in Illustrator that gives people the most grief. When I'm drawing something in Illustrator, I like to have my attributes set to no fill and a black stroke. That means that I can draw my path and the fill doesn't sort of interfere with what I'm seeing on screen, and I might style that up a bit later on. But one or two things about the pen tool is that you really want to keep your paths to a minimum. And as a general rule, where you encounter a change of direction, so this is going up, 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 flattening somewhere around here at 12 o'clock, and down, down, down here where we have a change of direction, you see that a point exists where we encounter a change of direction. So I'm going to click and hold and drag, and I'm going to set my attributes up correctly. Bad teacher. Clicking down here, so this is 12 o'clock, this is 3 o'clock, I believe. I'm going to go to 6 o'clock, and I'm keeping my points minimal. Now, they may or not be perfect, but we're going to ensure that we have minimal points to start with. This will ensure smoother curves, always will. So a little curve there. Now mine's not going to be perfect straight away. I'll come back and change these, altering this and clicking and dragging. I'm going to come down through here. There's a slight change of direction through here. some sort of change of direction here, so you can see it's going down and then it's going across. Clicking and holding, clicking and holding and dragging, clicking and holding and dragging, clicking and dragging. And I'm going to go through like so. Clicking on this end point, this very end point, allows me to come back into what we call a corner shape. So if I go there now, I'm going to click back on that end point to get a nice sharp point, and I think I can make this jump through here. So there is my shape created. Same down here. It's a little hard to see, but do your best. Pen tool is really the sign of mastery of Illustrator. Once you can manage to use the pen tool, you can start to consider yourself a fairly proficient Illustrator user. And then from there we can give those shapes colouring. As I say, I like to draw with no fill first because that's just a nice way to get that up. Now, as I say with the pen tool, you may or may not get it right the first time. Use your white arrow. Use your white arrow, your direct selection tool, to click on any segment or point. This will access these sort of handlebars, if you like, and I can drag these to finesse my curve. And as they say, not too many people can draw a perfect curve. In fact, it's almost impossible. That's why we let computers do things. So I'm getting this nice sort of curve going on. I'm reasonably happy with that, given the time that we have together, and I can live with that. Okay, so there is some fundamentals of Illustrator, and I hope that helps you create the things that you want to create. Okay, so I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next time. Woo! You just walked in, perfect timing.
Oh, really?
That was good. I've done, I was just talking to myself for, we're doing a little test later on.
Okay.
But,
Oh no.
but no, it's good. I've recorded a video that does it all for you. Well, it doesn't do it all for you, but it steps through how to do it.
Yeah, oh cool.
And
That's cool.
yeah, so hopefully